Eretria is a town in Euboea, Greece, facing the coast of Attica across the narrow South Euboean Gulf. It was an important Greek polis in the 6th–5th century BC, mentioned by many famous writers and actively involved in significant historical events. Excavations of the ancient city began in the 1890s and have been conducted since 1964 by the Greek Archaeological Service and the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece. History. Prehistory. The first evidence for human activity in the area of Eretria, pottery shards and stone artifacts from the late Neolithic period found on the Acropolis as well as in the plain. No permanent structures have yet been found. It is therefore unclear whether a permanent settlement existed at that time. The first known settlement from the early Heladic period was located in the plain. A granary and several other buildings as well as a pottery kiln have been found so far. This settlement was moved to the top of the Acropolis in the Middle Heladic period, because the plain was flooded by the nearby lagoon. In the late Heladic period, the population dwindled and the remains found so far have been interpreted as an observation post. The site was abandoned during the Middle Ages. Archaic to Roman period. The oldest archaeological finds date the foundation of the city to the 9th century BC. It was probably founded as the harbour of Lefkandi, which is located 15 kilometers to the west. The name comes from the Greek rho epsilon tau eta sigma, eratus, rower, and the verb rho epsilon sigma sigma epsilon iota nu, rho epsilon tau tau epsilon iota nu, erasane, eratine, to row, which makes Eretria the city of the rowers. Eretria's population and importance increased at the same time as Lefkandi began to decline in importance from c. 825 BC onwards. The natural superiority of Eretria's harbour and the importance of trade to the Euboeans is one explanation for this gradual population migration from Lefkandi to Eretria. The earliest surviving mention of Eretria was by Homer, who listed Eretria as one of the Greek cities which sent ships to the Trojan War. In the 8th century BC, Eretria and her near neighbour and rival Chalcis were both powerful and prosperous trading cities. Eretria controlled the Aegean islands of Andros, Tennis and Chios. They also held territory in Boeotia on the Greek mainland. Eretria was also involved in the Greek colonization and founded the colonies of Pitichinaccio and Cumae in Italy together with Chalcis. At the end of the 8th century BC, however, Eretria and Chalcis fought a prolonged war for control of the fertile Lelantine plain. Little is known of the details of this war, but it is clear that Eretria was defeated. The city was destroyed and Eretria lost her lands in Boeotia and her Aegean dependencies. Neither Eretria nor Chalcis ever again counted for much in Greek politics. As a result of this defeat, Eretria turned to colonization. She planted colonies in the northern Aegean, on the coast of Macedon, in Italy and Sicily. The Eretrians were Ionians and were thus natural allies of Athens. When the Ionian Greeks in Asia Minor rebelled against Persia in 499 BC, Eretria joined Athens in sending aid to the rebels, because Miletus supported Eretria in the Lelantine War. As a result, Darius made a point of punishing Eretria during his invasion of Greece. In 490 BC the city was sacked and burned by the Persians under the admiral Datis and the population was deported to Mesopotamia. The Temple of Apollo, built around 510 BC, was destroyed by the Persians. Parts of a pediment were found in 1900, including the torso of an Athena statue. Eretria was rebuilt shortly afterwards and took part with 600 hoplites in the Battle of Plataea. The ancient writer Plutarch mentions a woman of Eretria, who was kept by Artabanus, at the Persian court of Artaxerxes. who facilitated the audience that Themistocles obtained with the Persian king. During the 5th century BC, the whole of Euboea became part of the Delian League, which later became the Athenian Empire. Eretria and other cities of Euboea rebelled unsuccessfully against Athens in 446 BC. During the Peloponnesian War, Eretria was an Athenian ally against her Dorian rivals Sparta and Corinth. But soon the Eretrians, along with the rest of the empire, found Athenian domination oppressive. When the Spartans defeated the Athenians at the Battle of Eretria in 411 BC, the Euboean cities all rebelled. After her eventual defeat by Sparta in 4004 BC, Athens soon recovered and re-established her hegemony over Euboea, which was an essential source of grain for the urban population. The Eretrians rebelled again in 349 BC, and this time the Athenians could not recover control. In 343 BC, supporters of Philip II of Macedon gained control of the city, but the Athenians under Demosthenes recaptured it in 341 BC. The Battle of Cherone in 338 BC, in which Philip defeated the combined armies of the Greeks, marked the end of the Greek cities as independent states, and Eretria dwindled to become a provincial town. In 198 BC it was plundered by the Romans. In 87 BC it was finally destroyed in the First Mithridatic War and abandoned. The place is mentioned in Plato's poem, On the Dead of Eretria. Site monuments. Temple of Apollo Daphniphorus. The Temple of Apollo Daphniphorus is the most important and wider-known monument of Eretria. Together with its enclosure, it constituted the sacred temenos of Apollo, a religious center and fundamental place of worship within the core of the ancient city, to the north of the Agora. According to the Homeric hymn to Apollo, when the god was seeking for a location to found its oracle, he arrived to the Lelantine plain. The first temple is dated to the geometric period and was situated probably near the harbor, as the sea then reached the area of the Agora. The Hecatombedon apsidal edifice is the earliest in its type among those mentioned by Homer, and slightly after the Hecatombedon temple of Hera on the island of Samos. It was flanked to the south by another apsidal building which also came to light. The so-called Daphnephorio, or space with laurels, is the most ancient edifice in Eretria, related to the early cult of Apollo in Delphi. At the center of this edifice were preserved the clay bases supporting the laurel trunks that propped up the roof. In the early 16th century, a second Hecatombedon temple was erected through earth filled upon its geometric predecessor, on a solid artificial terrace. This temple had wooden columns, and was subsequently covered with earth in order to build the later and most renowned of all temples in the city. Construction started at the late 6th century BC, and the temple was perhaps still unfinished when the Persians razed the city in 490 BC. Porous stones and marble were the materials used for this Doric peristyle temple. It had a predomos and an opisthodomos arranged with 2 columns in antes. The cella was divided into 3 naves by 2 interior colonnades. After the destruction of the city by the Persians, the temple was repaired and remained in use, yet in 198 BC it was destroyed again, this time by the Romans, a fact which initiated the gradual abandonment and dilapidation of the monument until the 1st century BC. Unfortunately, the majority of architectural parts from this temple and other sanctuaries of the city were reused as construction material. Only a few drums, together with fragmented capitals and triglyphs, remained from the superstructure of the monument. Of the sumptuous sculptural decoration survive only parts of the West Pediment featuring in relief the fight of the Amazons. The center was occupied by Athena and is partially preserved, depicting her trunk with the Gorgonion on the thorax. A superb work of art is the complex of Theseus and Antiope, marked by sensitivity and softness of the form, internal force and clarity, despite the ornamental tendency obvious in the coiffures and the folds of their clothes. These sculptures are impregnated by the rules of archaic plasticity. The analogies are rendered in an innovative manner, a precursor to the idealization and the force of the classical art. The entire composition supposedly featured chariots to Athena's right and left, one chariot presumably carrying Theseus and Antiope, while Hercules might ride the other, and the picture could be complemented by fighting Amazons and a dead warrior. The East Pediment possibly narrated the Gigantomachy. The details of the faces and the clothes were colored, thus rendering the depiction more vivid. Fragmented sculptures that may be part of the temple after the destruction by the Persians have been located in Rome. Today are visible only the foundations of the post-archaic temple, as well as remains of the geometric temples uncovered in lower deposits. The temples in the temenos of Apollo Daphne Phorus were excavated between 1899 and 1910 by Kappa Co-Uruniates. Further investigations were conducted by Mrs. I. Constantinou and by the Swiss Archaeological School. The ancient theatre of Eretria, the most impressive monument of ancient Eritrea, one of the oldest known theatres, lies in the western section of town, between the Western Gate, the stadium and the upper gymnasium. The Temple of Dionysos was found at its southwest end, as indicated by the architectural remains of the scene. The initial construction phase followed the invasion by the Persians and the reconstruction of the city in the 5th century BC, whereas the 4th century BC marked the site's peak. A striking fact is the construction of the cavea on an artificial hill surrounded by numerous retaining walls, instead of taking advantage of the citadel's slopes. During the first building phase, the scene looked like a palace, disposed of 5 adjacent rectangle rooms and found itself at the same level as the circular orchestra, leading to it via 3 entrances. At its peak, the theatre suffered transformations and was shaped to a large extent in its present form. The cavea comprised 11 tiers divided by 10 staircases. The circular orchestra was transferred for 8 meters to the north, and was lowered by 3 meters. The scene was amplified by 2 backstages connected through a portico with an ionic facade, thus raising above the orchestra. This difference in heights was evened up by a vaulted underground gallery, leading through the scene to the center of the orchestra. This was in all probability the Huronian Stairway, allowing actors impersonating chthonic deities and the dead to appear and perform at the orchestra. Local porous stone was used for the foundation and limestone for the paradoir, which sloped to the orchestra in order to diminish the difference in height with the cavea. The theatre seated 6,300 spectators and is reminiscent in form to the Theatre of Dionysos in Athens, after transformation of the latter in 330 BC. Following the destruction of Eretria by the Romans in 198 BC, it was rebuilt with lower quality materials, and the rooms to the south of the parados were then apparently decorated with color mortars of the first Pompeian style. Unfortunately, most benches have been looted. There are still the impressive remains of the scene, especially the vaulted underground passage leading to the orchestra center. Excavation of the monument was undertaken by the American Archaeological School, while the local Ephorate of Antiquities strived greatly for its restoration. Temple of Isis at Eretria. Among the most interesting monuments of ancient Eritrea is the Ision, a temple sacred to the goddess Isis and other Egyptian deities. Situated to the south of the town, between the baths and the lower gymnasium or the palatra, it extends behind the small harbor, a detail that correlates the temenos with merchants who had their interests in Eritrea. According to excavation and inscription testimonies, the temple was probably built in the 4th century BC and was surrounded by other edifices and auxiliary spaces. The initiation to the cult of Isis and the Egyptian deities occurred during the Hellenistic period by Greek merchants who came to Greece from Egypt. After the unification of the then-known world by Alexander the Great, Their worship in Eritrea has also been attested by inscriptions, of which the most important is set on a limestone block to the left of the Predomos before the cella. The Temple of Isis was initially simple and oriented to the east, with a Predomos that was distile in Antes. The ceremonial clay statue of the goddess stood on a base within the cella. In front of the temple was the altar and nearby a small drain tank. The temple was reconstructed after the destruction of the city by the Romans in 198 BC. It then acquired a larger external Predomos on ameliorated foundations and was surrounded by porticos on 3 sides. Only the southwest end of the portico was covered by a roof. The columns were later replaced by a parapet. At the center of the east forecourt was a portal facing the entrance of the sanctuary. 15 more edifices and auxiliary spaces lied to the north, considered by the excavators as places of purification. Among them was a courtyard and an andren, while one room of the complex had a superb mosaic floor featuring lozenges. Papadakis. In recent years, the Archaeological Service of the Ministry of Culture undertook further excavations in the wider area of the temple, which brought to light an additional complex of courtyards and rooms directly related to the sanctuary. House with the mosaics. This splendid house was built in California, 370 BC, and remained in use for about a century. It is distinguished by its floors, covered with elegant pebble mosaics representing mythological scenes, Nereids on the back of a seahorse, legendary battles between Arimaspians and griffins, sphinxes and panthers. The building is a representative specimen of the classical and Hellenistic domestic architecture. In the 1st century BC, a funerary monument with a massive rectangular peribolis was erected over the ruins of the house. The monument was excavated between 1975 and 1980. Macedonian Tomb of Iratze. The so-called Tomb of Iratze lies on a hill to the northwest of Eritrea city and counts among the most significant monuments of Evia Island. Based on the findings, it is dated to the 4th century BC, the time when these characteristic burial monuments of the Macedonian type make their appearance in southern Greece after the descent of the Macedons. More Macedonian tombs were found in the wider area around Eritrea, namely in the settlements of Kotrona and Amarinthos. The Tomb of Iratze consists of a single vaulted chamber and a dromos of stone and bricks. The burial chamber is reminiscent of a residential room. It is built of porous stone plastered with white mortar. During the excavation were found 2 replicas of painted stone thrones bearing relief decoration. At the rear corners of the burial chamber were 2 marble bed-shaped sarcophagi. The tomb had been pillaged. Among the findings today exhibited in the New York Metropolitan Museum are bronze vases and clay statuettes of Iratze, which inspired the tomb's conventional name. Above the tomb was uncovered a stone-built construction, probably the basis of a sepulchre. The monument was excavated in 1897 and is well preserved to date. Fixing works are undertaken when deemed necessary. They are monitored by the local Ephorate of Antiquities. Tholis at Eritrea. Excavations carried out by the Greek Archaeological Service have revealed the limestone foundations and crepus of a circular building. It was erected in the 5th century BC in the agora of the city, and underwent several modifications in the 4th and the 3rd centuries BC. A circular bodros has also survived at the center of the monument. Eritrea today. The modern town of Eritrea is now a popular beachside resort. The historic and archaeological finds from Eritrea and Lefkandi are displayed in the Eritrea Museum, established by the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece. The town can be reached from Skala Oropou, Attica by ferry or via Halkida by road. It's an important station on the way to the south of the island. It has many taverns and a long beach promenade. The archaeological excavations are located on the northern edge of the modern town. Municipality. The municipality Eritrea was formed at the 2011 local government reform by the merger of the following 2 former municipalities that became municipal units: Amarinthos Eritrea. Historical population. Notable people. Menedemus, Greek philosopher. Philoxenus, painter.